So she's designing a collection for Selena Etc. with Martin Gomez, who Yolanda, manager of Selena Etc., does not like. He said that he actually told Selena many, many times that he felt that Yolanda was really creepy and possessive. Which she was a fan, like super fan, like president of the fan club fan. So I think Selena just chalked that up to her being obsessed with her in a good way. And then once again in 1994 at the Tejano Music Awards, Selena wins, say it with me, Female Artist of the Year. There she is, looking cute. Unfortunately, this year would not be all good. Selena receives notice from her vendors for the boutique that they're not being paid. And around the same time, Selena's dad is getting a lot of messages from fan club members who are saying that they didn't ever get what they paid for. So people are getting pissed at Selena, thinking that she's being fraudulent. So Selena talks to Yolanda, like, where are all the payments? Why haven't the vendors been paid? And Yolanda blames it on Martin. At this point, Selena thought that Yolanda was just really overworked. She had a lot on her plate. The fan club, the boutiques, it was a lot. So she got her friend Deborah from Quintanilla Productions to help Yolanda with the boutique. And Yolanda was not a fan of this at all. And there's Yolanda. I don't know if I've shown y'all a picture up until now, but that's her. Thankfully, her dad was not as forgiving as Selena was. He wanted the fan club records and he ordered Yolanda to go and get them from the boutique in San Antonio where she claimed they were. And her dad was livid, but Selena wanted to keep Yolanda on the team. For one, she had been super helpful up until this point. Selena trusted her 100%, and she'd become one of Selena's best friends. Keep in mind that she's touring all the time. She's mostly with her family. So this is her main girl, honestly. Then, amidst all this conflict, Selena performs February 26, 1995 at the Astrodome in Houston. And this is just such a look. And she once again, for the third time at this point, breaks the record for attendance at the Astrodome. And this time it was like 66,000 people, which is crazy. Luckily though, Selena's dad was still on the case of Yolanda. He went to the San Antonio boutique, he got the files, and he discovered that she was embezzling money. So the bank account for the boutique was under the name Maria Elida, and she was writing checks to Yolanda. But it was Yolanda's handwriting. And of course, Selena did not want to believe this, but the evidence was right there in front of her, so. And Abraham also was blaming himself for this because he's the one who got her on to work on the fan club in the first place. So they decided to confront Yolanda. So Selena and her dad confront Yolanda about the missing payments to vendors and the fact that fan club members have been saying they're not receiving anything even though they're paying. They also ask her about the bank account for the boutique because it's under the name Maria Elida, not Yolanda Saldivar like it should be. And Yolanda said that Maria was her sister and that she had to open the bank account under her name because the bank wouldn't let her open it under her own for some unknown reason. Her dad basically decided this was BS, and he told Yolanda that she was banned from ever coming to Quintanilla Productions again, banned from contacting Selena ever again, and that unless she produced the evidence that she was not guilty, he was starting a police investigation. Selena wasn't quite ready to fire Yolanda though. For one, Yolanda had financial information that they needed to do taxes, and two, she was in the process of helping Selena to open up a Monterey location for Selena, etc. So they leave the meeting on that note. The next day, the very next day, Yolanda shows up to Quintanilla Productions, even though he just told her, don't do that. Of course, Selena's dad drove straight there and immediately told her, leave. After that, her and Selena actually talked on the phone a little bit, but Selena ended up hanging up on her, and she told Chris that she just didn't feel like she could trust her anymore, which she couldn't. And that same day, Selena decided to remove Yolanda's name from the boutique's bank account and to replace her as fan club president. So devastating for Yolanda, essentially. So then the next day, Yolanda goes to a firearms shop in San Antonio to buy a weapon for protection. She said that a patient that she was an in-home nurse for had a family member who was threatening her, which is why she needed the weapon. Weirdly though, she specifically bought bullets that were meant to inflict maximum damage, which doesn't sound like defense to me. Then another day passes, and on March 13th of 1995, Yolanda gets with her lawyer and signs a resignation letter. Then she drives straight to Corpus and starts staying in a motel. But if she thought she was going to see Selena, she was wrong because Selena was actually doing a show in Miami. The next day, though, Yolanda calls Selena to set up a meeting with her, and Selena agrees. But Yolanda says that they need to meet in a parking lot about 20 miles outside of Corpus because there's just too much traffic in Corpus. So I think that she was trying to pretend like she was driving in from San Antonio that day because, as we know, she was staying in Corpus at that point. So they meet, and Selena tells her that Yolanda can still help her with the Monterey boutique because she does need help at least until she can find a replacement. At that point, Yolanda decides to show Selena the weapon that she bought, which is a weird move. It seems like Selena probably thought that it was because she was afraid of her dad, though. So she tells her, "Don't worry, I'll protect you from my dad. You can get rid of that weapon. You don't need it." And I guess that made Yolanda feel a lot better because they left the situation peacefully. Then, March 25th, Selena's dad goes looking for those bank statements that he had gotten from the San Antonio boutique, only to discover that they're missing. He does find, though, a letter in Yolanda's handwriting. So Yolanda said that she had sent a fan named Yvonne Perez to the bank to deposit a check for $3,000. But it was never deposited, and Yolanda had found out now, and it was just too late. She couldn't find Yvonne anymore anywhere. She also said that Maria Elida, who had the boutique bank account, had been writing checks to Yolanda to be cashed. But it turned out that there was no money left in the boutique bank account, so Maria Elida shut down that bank account. Therefore, Yolanda would just have to be paid by the bank whatever Maria Elida owed her. So they confront Yolanda again and ask her about Yvonne Perez. And Yolanda says she doesn't know who that is, which is weird because why would you write her a check for $3,000 then? At this point, her dad has definitely caught on that these are all fake names. It's all Yolanda. And Selena said that she's planning on firing Yolanda soon, but she had already decided that she was taking her on a trip to Tennessee where she was finishing her English album, so it would have to be after that. She did tell Yolanda on the trip, though, that they knew the bank statements were missing, they'd already noted them down as missing, and that Yolanda needed to hand them over as soon as they got back to Texas, because she was onto her and her shadiness by this point. But then that very next day, March 26th, Yolanda steals some perfume samples and some bank statements from the new Monterey location of Selena, etc. And then on March 27th, Yolanda repurchases a weapon and asks Selena to meet with her in her motel room. Fortunately, though, there was a ton of fans and Selena got mobbed, so the meeting really couldn't take place in any private way. On March 29th, Yolanda and Selena traveled to Monterey for the boutique. And on that day, Yolanda calls Dr. Ricardo Martinez, who was a financial advisor and a kind of doctor. He knew Selena, to let him know that she had been R-worded. The next day, March 30th, Yolanda calls Dr. Martinez again, and he said that it sounded like someone was trying to take the phone from her, which he thought was fishy because she had just told him the day before that she had been R-worded. So he calls the hotel and asks them to do a wellness check. Well, they do, and it turns out that she had just left the hotel to go back to Corpus. So her and Yolanda have just gotten back from Monterey. They're back in Corpus Christi. And Yolanda is staying at the Days Inn motel now. So Yolanda calls Selena to let her know that she was R-worded when they were in Monterey and asks her to meet her at her motel room. And Selena goes, but she brings Chris. Chris drives her there and he just waits outside in his truck because obviously this is a sensitive matter, so she doesn't want to involve him when Yolanda didn't want him in there. When she comes back to the car, though, she does note to Chris that Yolanda still hasn't given them the bank statements. That afternoon, Selena also calls the man who's been working on the fragrances with her and discovers that they were taken. So she planned to go and get those perfume samples back and to fire Yolanda. And then that night, Selena gets another call from Yolanda asking her to take her to the hospital. She said she was bleeding heavily from her private area after the R-wording. But Chris said it was way too late. It was like the middle of the night, so he didn't want Selena leaving then, but Selena promised her that she would go with her in the morning. And the way that Selena is still willing to help Yolanda after all of this, still willing to trust her on this matter, I can't imagine being that nice of a person, to be honest. So March 31st, 1995, Selena goes to meet Yolanda at 7:30 in the morning. And Yolanda told Selena more about how she was attacked in Monterey, and they went to the hospital. Once they got there, though, Yolanda told the doctor she was only bleeding a little bit, whereas she had told Selena the night before that she was bleeding heavily. So Selena was kind of annoyed, and they ended up having to leave the hospital anyways because they couldn't do the trauma examination at a hospital in Corpus when the attack happened outside of the country, and she was a San Antonio resident, so it had to be done in San Antonio. At this point, though, some hours had passed, and her dad was worried about her because she hadn't shown up to her recording appointment. So Chris called her to check in, and she said, "Oh, I just forgot. I'm taking care of the situation. I'll be there soon." When they got back from the hospital, Selena was pissed, and she said she was done with Yolanda. Yolanda was fired, and she just wanted her bank statements and her samples and to get the hell out. Yolanda said that the samples and the documents were in her room, so they went to her motel room to get it. And people at the motel heard them arguing and shouting. Then Selena took the briefcase that had the documents and the samples in it and made for the door. And that's when Yolanda took the weapon out of her bag and shot Selena in the back as she was trying to leave. So Selena is at this point bleeding out, but she's still running, screaming, "Help, I've been shot." And Yolanda is running after her, still pointing the weapon at her and calling her a bitch, which is pretty incriminating. But apparently eventually she went back to her room very calmly. So I guess she figured at that point that Selena was beyond help and was done with the situation. But Selena ran to the lobby and was screaming at them to lock the door or she would get shot again. She needed help. So Selena makes it all the way to the lobby while she's bleeding out, and her last words on the floor of the lobby are, "Yolanda, room 158. Which is pretty incriminating. Good job, Selena, on that. She was immediately rushed to the hospital, and they did everything they could to try and save her. Like, really everything. But the bullet had crushed her shoulder and crushed a lung. And actually, according to the autopsy report, if it had been even a little bit differently placed, she may have survived. There was rumors that they refused to do a blood transfusion on her in the hospital because they were Jehovah's Witnesses, which I mentioned way at the beginning of this, but it clearly wasn't that big a part of their lives. They didn't talk about it a lot, and that's just a rumor. They did do the transfusion. There are rumors that I don't know if they're true or not, that her dad was actually kind of upset that they had done the transfusions after the fact, but at that point they were trying to do everything they could to keep her alive. And she was 23 at the time of her death. Yolanda was 34. And actually, a lot of people thought that it was an April Fool's prank at the time because it was the day before April Fool's. So when the news broke, some people they couldn't believe it. They really thought it was an April Fool's joke. I mean, she was so young. So after she had shot her, chased her, then gone back to her room, Yolanda got in her truck to try and leave. And a person working at the motel said that she had something wrapped in a towel, which was probably the firearm. Luckily, a police officer saw her, got out of his car, pointed a weapon at her, and told her to get out of the car. But instead of just doing what he said, she decided to back her car up in between two cars, but the police car was blocking her from leaving. So at this point, she's cornered, and she decides to point her own weapon at herself. So then they had to bring in the SWAT team and the FBI Crisis Negotiation Unit to try and get her to give herself up. And during that time, she made up various stories about why all of this happened, that it went off by accident, that she was trying to aim at herself, but accidentally hit Selena. After 4 hours of not getting out of her car, they drained the tank of gas in her car, but she still wasn't giving up. At 6 hours, she almost gave herself up. She got out of the car and started walking, but then she saw a cop with a weapon and panicked and ran back to her car and pointed her own weapon at her head again. Which, if you were scared of the weapon... Then finally, after 9 hours, she gave herself up. And at that point, there were tons of Selena fans around the scene, and they were crying, like weeping as they took her away. And there was a rumor that Selena was pregnant at the time that she was killed. Yolanda claimed that Selena told her right before it happened, but her family denied these rumors, even though we do know she was trying around that time. So there was a trial, of course, but unfortunately it was not televised. Selena's dad said the motive, though, was 1, being caught for embezzlement, and then 2, being fired. Her dad also said that he thought that she probably attempted the shooting multiple times before it actually happened, which, looking back, I think we can say which times those were. Her excuse that the firearm went off accidentally was instantly proven wrong because it took a certain amount of weight to pull the trigger, and unless she had super strong fingers, that was intentional. And the jury was only deliberating on first-degree murder, so either she was getting off completely free or she was screwed. And on October 23rd, 1995, she was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years. And she actually got a ton of threats in prison made against her, so she had to be moved to isolation. Since then, Yolanda has also been claiming that Selena was not faithful to Chris, that she had an affair with Ricardo Martinez, and he actually later on said that also, but her family says that's a complete lie, and so does Chris. July 18th, 1995, they released Selena's Dreaming of You album. It was 5 songs in English, plus some Tejano songs, and Dreaming of You was actually supposed to be given to Whitney Houston, but her brother A.B. convinced the songwriter to give it to Selena instead, and of course, she did amazing. And it was her biggest hit in English. And this album was super successful just in general too. Unfortunately, Selena didn't get to see that, but they released it because they thought her art should be out there. After her death, Chris took over Selena, etc., although the Monterey branch was never opened, and the San Antonio branch closed in 1999, and the Corpus branch closed in 2005. Quintanilla Productions turned into the Selena Museum, which is awesome. If you're in Corpus, you should go see it. Since she had always wanted a makeup line, Suzette launched one in her honor with MAC. And everything Selena related goes through her family. They are very serious about guarding her legacy, because when she died, it was decided that Selena's likeness would be managed by their estate, which is obviously managed by him. Chris released a memoir in 2012 called To Selena with Love, and he tried to do a miniseries based off of it, but her dad said no. And he sued Chris because he said that the book was also unauthorized and the production company is trying to do the miniseries. Unclear on the details, but they did settle the lawsuit and they are now a unified front on continuing her legacy. So, of course, Selena's story is now tied to Yolanda forever, which is probably not what Selena would want, but definitely what Yolanda would want since she was obsessed with her. And that's why I've kind of tried to make an effort to not include pictures of her in this series as much as possible, but I know we want to see what she looks like, so here she is now. And she will be eligible for parole on March 30th of 2025, which is actually quite soon and very scary. She's actually also being held out of prison about 2 hours away from me, so I am very glad that I will be moving. Overall, though, Selena was a legend. She lived a wonderful life, even though it was short, and everyone speaks so highly of her, even today. I mean, her fashion is iconic, her music is iconic. She's just amazing. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, comment any additions you might have or any thoughts or opinions. I'd love to hear them, as well as any series suggestions or new video suggestions in general. And if you want to see more of me and more of my series, please consider subscribing, and I'll see you next week with another one.